I hadn't seen Daniel in almost 8 years. The last time was at our wedding. He was my husband's best man, all nerves and laughter, fumbling through his toast like he couldn't wait to sit down again. Back then, he was just the funny one, the younger friend who always tagged along on fishing trips and barbecue nights. So, when he texted last month, "Hey, I'm in town for a few weeks. Mind if I stop by?" I didn't think much of it. Just a polite visit. A small reminder of an earlier time when our lives still felt open-ended. But the moment he stepped through the door, I knew something was different. He looked older, of course, sharper around the edges, in a way that wasn't just about age. His voice was lower, his posture steadier. But it wasn't that. It was how he looked at me a half second too long, as if measuring what had changed. And I realized I was doing the same thing. The house was too quiet that afternoon. My husband, Mark, was still at work. The ceiling fan clicked every few seconds, like a metronome counting our silences. I poured coffee for both of us, hands slightly trembling. Not from nerves, I told myself, just too much caffeine. "So," I said, smiling too wide. "How long has it been?" "8 years." He nodded. Something like that. He didn't say much after that. Just looked around the living room, the family photos, the little piles of life that never quite stay organized. When he finally sat down, he brushed his thumb along the edge of the mug, tracing invisible circles in the steam. "You still make it the same way," he said softly. It took me a moment to realize what he meant. Coffee. Black. No sugar. The way I used to drink it when he'd stop by after Mark's late shifts, back when we all lived in the same city. I laughed. A small, awkward sound. "I didn't think you'd remember." "I remember a lot of things," he said. That silence after, it stretched long enough to make the air heavy. I noticed a small scar along his jawline I'd never seen before. He caught me staring and smiled, but it wasn't playful. It was the kind of smile that carried something unsaid. When Mark finally came home, the whole atmosphere shifted. Daniel stood up too fast, knocking his knee against the coffee table. Mark clapped him on the back, all easy charm and nostalgia. I just stood there, smiling, pretending my heart wasn't still racing for reasons I couldn't explain. Later, as I loaded dishes into the sink, I caught Daniel's reflection in the kitchen window, standing just outside on the porch, his phone in hand, looking like he was about to leave, but not moving. When he finally turned toward the glass, his eyes met mine, steady, unblinking, and he mouthed something I couldn't hear. That's when I realized this visit wasn't just about catching up. It was about something he hadn't said yet, something that would change everything. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's expression on the porch, that unreadable mix of apology and something else I couldn't name. I kept telling myself I was overthinking. He'd just been tired, maybe nostalgic, but still the image stuck. Mark fell asleep fast beside me, his soft snoring filling the room like a reminder of ordinary life. We've been married 14 years. Comfortable, predictable years. The kind that smooth out excitement until everything feels like background noise. We met in our 20s, co-workers who became partners, then parents, then roommates who sometimes remember to hold hands. There was no bitterness, just a quiet distance that had settled without us noticing. We didn't argue much. We just stopped asking questions. Daniel had been part of our early days, the friend who helped us move apartments, who made Mark laugh when stress got heavy. I used to like having him around. He was younger but thoughtful, almost too observant. He'd notice when I changed my hair or looked tired after work, things Mark would often miss. Back then, I'd brushed it off as friendliness. Now, as I lay awake listening to the clock tick, those small memories began replaying like scenes I hadn't understood the first time. The next morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen, bright and too honest. I found Daniel sitting at the table, already awake, a mug of coffee in front of him. He must have let himself in. Something about that felt strange, and yet not entirely unwelcome. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Didn't want to wake you guys. I was just thinking." There was a pause. I waited for him to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he looked around the kitchen at the family calendar filled with work shifts, grocery lists, and our son's college schedule scribbled in blue pen. "You've built a good life here," he said. His tone was careful, like each word had to pass through something unspoken first. I shrugged. It's fine. Steady. He looked up then, and for a second I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not pity, not judgment, just recognition. Like he understood more than I'd said. Before I could ask what he was really doing here, Mark walked in, cheerful and unaware. The morning moved on in small talk and laughter, but underneath it, I felt the undercurrent, a quiet awareness between Daniel and me that hadn't been there before. When he left that afternoon, he said he'd stop by again before the weekend. And as the door closed behind him, I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted him to, or if I was already waiting for it. By Thursday, the air in the house felt heavier. It wasn't something I could explain, just that quiet, unshakable awareness that something was shifting, even if no one said it out loud. Mark had been distracted lately, buried in work and phone calls that ran late into the night. It wasn't unusual. He'd been managing a new project, and stress had become our third roommate. Still, I caught myself wondering if he noticed the way I lingered by the window each evening. The same time Daniel said he might stop by again. When Daniel finally did, it was almost dark. He brought dinner, insisting it was just a friendly gesture. Mark said he'd be late, he explained, setting the takeout on the counter. Figured you shouldn't eat alone. Something in his tone made me pause. He wasn't flirting, not really. It was gentler than that, but harder to dismiss. We ate in the kitchen, the quiet kind of meal where the clink of forks filled more space than words. He asked about my work, my son's college plans, small things that somehow felt too intimate. I asked about his job, his travels, the city he'd moved to. It's good, he said. Busy, but lonely sometimes. That last word hung in the air between us. I didn't respond right away. My hand stayed folded on the table, and I focused on the small oil stain near his sleeve, like noticing that detail could keep things normal. He looked at me for a long time. You ever think about how fast everything changes? Too often, I said, forcing a smile. He nodded, eyes drifting toward the family photo on the wall. Mark's lucky, he added softly. It should have sounded like a compliment, but something about it made my stomach twist. I opened my mouth to answer, and then my phone buzzed. A text from Mark, running later than I thought. Don't wait up. Daniel must have seen the message flash across the screen. He leaned back in his chair, quiet for a long time. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "That sounds familiar. What does?" I asked. He shook his head. Nothing. Just reminds me of before. Before what? The question sat on my tongue, but I didn't ask. The silence grew roots, not awkward, just too honest. Outside, rain had started, soft at first, then steady against the windows. When Daniel finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He hesitated there, hand on the doorknob, like he wanted to say something important but couldn't. Instead, he just said, "Take care, okay?" After he left, I noticed he'd forgotten his jacket on the chair. I picked it up, and something fell from the pocket, a folded photo worn at the edges. It was from our wedding. But in this one, Mark wasn't in the frame. Only me and Daniel standing too close. I found the photo still in my hand the next morning. I must have fallen asleep holding it. The edges creased from where my thumb had pressed too tightly. It wasn't the picture itself that bothered me. It was what it meant. Why did Daniel still have it, tucked away like something private? And why that one, the photo without Mark in it? I slid it into the back of a drawer before Mark woke up. He wouldn't understand, and maybe I didn't either. But all day, the thought of it stayed with me, whispering at the edges of everything I did. By evening, Daniel texted, "Hey, I think I left my jacket at your place." I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. "You did. I can drop it off tomorrow." He answered almost instantly. "I'll come by. Easier that way." That night, the house felt different again, quiet but not peaceful. Mark was still at work. Rain tapped against the window, same as before. I caught myself straightening the kitchen, checking the mirror, then hating that I cared how I looked. When Daniel knocked, I opened the door before he could ring the bell. He stood there, damp from the rain, hair dripping slightly into his eyes. "Sorry," he said, smiling. "Didn't mean to bother you this late." "You're fine," I replied, though my voice came out softer than I meant. He stepped inside, eyes scanning the room like he was remembering it. I handed him a jacket, and for a moment our fingers brushed, not on purpose but enough to make the air shift. "You found a photo," he said quietly. I froze. "You meant for me to?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I didn't plan to show it, but maybe I wanted you to see it." I kept it because that day he stopped himself. "Never mind." I crossed my arms. "That day what?" He looked at me, eyes searching mine like he was deciding whether to tell the truth. "That day was when I realized something I probably shouldn't have." The words landed heavy, somewhere between confession and regret. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the front window, Mark's car pulling into the driveway. Daniel stepped back, tension flickering across his face. "I should go." He moved toward the door, but I caught his sleeve without thinking. "Daniel." He turned, eyes meeting mine, full of something I didn't dare name. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then the sound of the front door unlocking broke it. Mark's voice called out, cheerful and unaware. Daniel's hand slipped from mine, and he was gone before I could even find the words to stop him. I stood there, heart racing, the photo burning like a secret in my pocket. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about the past anymore. Something was already breaking in the present. Mark came home humming, shaking rain off his jacket like nothing was out of place. He kissed my cheek in that distracted way he always did, already reaching for his phone before his shoes were even off. "Daniel's car out front?" he asked casually. I froze for half a second, then forced a steady voice. He just stopped by to grab the jacket he left. Mark nodded, not looking up. Good guy. Always forgetful. He didn't notice my hands tightening around the dish towel. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it, something he'd gotten good at over the years. The evening carried on in polite routine. Dinner reheated, small talk about work, a half-watched show on TV. But underneath it all, the air felt fragile, like one wrong word could shatter everything. Later, when he went to shower, I pulled out the photo again. The edges were soft now, the image grainy, but Daniel's expression was clear. He wasn't smiling like the others. He was looking past the camera, straight at me. And suddenly I remembered, that day, at the wedding, there was a moment. I dropped my bouquet. He'd picked it up, handed it back. His hand had brushed mine then too, and he'd said something I hadn't quite heard over the laughter. I'd forgotten it for 14 years. Or maybe I'd just chosen to. The next morning, Mark left early for a meeting, coffee half finished, a text buzzing on his phone after he walked out the door. I shouldn't have looked, but my eyes caught the preview. "Can't wait to see you again today." The name wasn't Daniel's. My chest went cold. For a long moment, I just stood there, the phone in my hand, the words sinking in slowly like ink through paper. Then I set it down, almost carefully, and looked out the window. The driveway was empty except for a small note tucked under the wiper of my car. I stepped outside, the air sharp and damp, and pulled it free. It was Daniel's handwriting. "We need to talk. Not about us, about Mark." The words blurred as rain started again, soft but insistent. My hands trembled, not from the cold this time. By the time I found Daniel that afternoon, sitting alone in his truck outside the coffee shop near the old park, he looked different, tired, uneasy. He didn't waste time. "You should know," he said quietly. "Mark's been calling someone. Someone from work." I stared at him. "You been checking?" He shook his head. "No, he told me. Last week. Said he didn't know how to tell you." My throat tightened. "Why would he tell you?" Daniel's eyes met mine, steady and heavy, because he thought I'd understand. I felt the ground shift beneath everything I thought I knew, about Mark, about Daniel, about loyalty itself. Daniel leaned forward slightly, voice low. "He's not who you think he is." And in that moment, I realized neither of them were. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The sound of rain against the truck's windshield filled the silence between us, steady and relentless. "What do you mean he's not who I think he is?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't look at me right away. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "Mark's been seeing someone from his office," he said slowly. "It's not new. It's been months." The words didn't hit all at once. They sank in piece by piece like water finding every crack it could. I stared straight ahead, watching the street lights blur through the rain. "And you just knew?" "He told me," Daniel said. "We met for lunch last week. He said he didn't want to hurt you, but he didn't know how to stop. I let out a shaky laugh, one of those dry, bitter sounds you don't recognize as your own. And you thought I should hear it from you? He turned to me then, his expression pained. I didn't want to, but seeing you last night, I couldn't pretend anymore. My chest tightened. All the quiet distance between Mark and me, all the late nights and half-finished conversations. It suddenly made sense in the worst possible way. I don't know what to do with this, I said quietly. Daniel hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. Another photo, folded small. You don't have to do anything right now, he said. But you should know. Mark gave me this years ago. Said to keep it just in case. I unfolded it slowly. It was the same wedding photo, but this time I could see the edges cropped. My own face had been cut from it. He said he didn't want reminders, Daniel added softly. The world seemed to tilt. All at once, every memory, every small silence, rearranged itself into something new and unfamiliar. I looked up at Daniel. Why are you telling me this? Because, he said, voice breaking just slightly, you deserve the truth. And because I think he's been lying to both of us. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Running late again. Don't wait up. Daniel saw it too. Neither of us said a word. Instead, I opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. It felt cold and strangely clean. I didn't know what would happen next. Only that something had ended, right there between the sound of rain and the truth finally spoken aloud. As I walked away, I heard Daniel call after me, voice raw and uncertain. There's something else you should know. I stopped, heart pounding, but didn't turn around. Because deep down, I already knew whatever he was about to say would change everything again. I stood in the rain for a long time after Daniel's voice faded. The parking lot was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that makes every sound echo louder. The hiss of tires passing on wet pavement, the low hum of streetlights, my own uneven breathing. When I finally turned back, Daniel was still there, waiting. His expression had changed. No longer guarded, just tired, like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long. What else? I asked softly. He hesitated, then said, Mark didn't want you to find out from me. That's why he told me about the affair. To make me choose between you both. He looked down. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't want to be the reason everything broke. It was strange, but hearing that, the honesty, even the guilt, steadied me. I realized it wasn't just betrayal that hurt. It was how long I'd ignored the small signs, the quiet distances that had been building for years. I nodded slowly. You didn't break it, Daniel. It was already cracked. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain softened to a drizzle. A car passed, its headlights briefly washing us in pale gold, then disappearing again. When I finally got home, the house was still. Mark wasn't there yet. I walked through the rooms, the framed photos, the worn couch, the unwashed mug on the counter, and everything looked both familiar and foreign. I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote him a note. Not angry, not pleading, just honest. I told him I knew, that I wasn't going to pretend anymore, that somewhere along the way, we'd both stopped seeing each other for who we were. By the time he came home, the note was waiting. I wasn't. Outside, the sky was clearing, and the air smelled faintly of wet pavement and something new. Not hope exactly, but space. Space to breathe. Space to start over. Daniel texted me once that night. Are you okay? I didn't answer right away. I watched the message for a while, the little light blinking on my screen, then finally typed back. Not yet, but maybe I will be. Weeks later, I found that wedding photo again, the one with Daniel in it. I didn't tear it up this time. I just tucked it into a box with the rest, a reminder of everything that can change and still somehow survive in memory. Some stories don't end neatly. They just shift from love to loss, from silence to truth. And sometimes, being shocked isn't the worst thing that can happen. Sometimes it's what finally wakes you up.